Our next speaker is Dr. Walter Anderson. Dr. Walter Anderson is a former chief of the United States Department of South Asia Division, and he has many works, but currently he is doing his research on Hindu nationalism and Indian assertion of foreign policy. So we welcome Dr. Walter Anderson. Please join us.
Assalamu alaikum. I have come to India many times. I came here first when I was 18 years old to go to school. My wife is an Indian. We have a house here. Through her, I've gotten to know much more about this country and its culture. My son is an overseas citizen of India. Whenever my wife and son want to make sure I don't know what they're saying, they speak to each other in Tamil. My wife's in South India. I can make by on Hindi and Urdu, but I cannot make by on Tamil. Anybody in this room know Tamil? Anybody? It's a very difficult language to learn. I can guarantee, I've been trying for years to learn it, and I still don't know it. This gathering, for me, I'm not a theologian like most of the people who have been speaking here. I started out in medicine, and I shifted to international relations. I was in the U.S. State Department, whereas the person who announced me said I headed the South Asia Division, during very difficult times in this part of the world. And I now teach at Johns Hopkins University. I'd like to make this a effort to get people to come to my school if you have sons and daughters who need to go to graduate school for a good education. But back to the topic is I feel particularly humble about sharing the stage with these people here who are theologians, who know their subject very well. I'm going to try to make a few comments about Sufi Islam as I see it and its application in the world. We certainly live in a world of troubled times. In fact, whenever I read an Indian newspaper, I'm more convinced of that than ever. Indian newspapers are all filled with bad news. Gary, you open the newspaper, all bad news. But there's a lot, behind that bad news, not only here, but elsewhere as well. There's fighting within countries between ethnic groups. There's fighting between countries themselves. There's fighting in families. The youth in many families are rebelling against their parents. We live in a time when Sufi Islam offers something important to people, and that is the sense of a common brotherhood or sisterhood, a common membership. There's something about Sufi Islam and Vedanta that the Prime Minister mentioned that's similar, that you're everybody. Everybody is you and you are everybody. You're one, basically one. And that's a very hard lesson to learn. Having been in U.S. diplomacy for almost 3 decades, I can tell you most people do not think that way. They do not think of themselves as one. You have a major task ahead of you to teach the world about the oneness of human beings under God. I think that's a unique thing. This meeting is unique because this is an effort to bring various parts of Sufi Islam together. And as I hear these people who are experts in Sufi Islam, they have much to offer the world. And I hope that all of us work together to bring about a reformation in the way that people think of each other today. I wanted to say something a little bit about my first exposure to Sufi Islam. And it was when a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist in Washington, D.C., whose real love is Indian art, his name is Dr. Ken Robbins, a few of you may know him, approached me and said, we ought to have a conference on Sufi Islam. Americans don't know Sufi Islam, and that's still the case, that they largely are ignorant of Sufi Islam. So we approached Salman Chisti at the Ajmer Dargah. One of the best moves I ever made was to approach him to ask if he would take part. He agreed to do so. He brought to Washington the Masters of Qawwali to perform. We had a 3-day conference, had over 3,000 people attending from the world of international journalism, banking, government, religion, academia. The musical performance that we had at the Smithsonian was sold out in an hour and a half. Wow. That's still a record. Only the previous week, Lady Gaga, have you ever heard of her? Very popular person, entertainer in the United States. It took, I'm told, 5 hours for her to fill the auditorium. Hour and a half. And outside the auditorium, there were a few hundred more people, and they had to put up speakers so that they could hear the music from inside. Given the popularity of the meetings, the demonstrations of Sufi art and music, there is an audience that's willing and wants to hear what you have to say. What you need to do now is you need to organize to make sure that gets done. And part of this is an organization to do that. I've written a paper, which for those of you who are interested, I go into what I think are the political conditions that are important for the propagation of your message of a commonality among all human beings. I hope you read it, because I'm not going to have much time to talk about it here. I just want to say a few summary comments on what I'm talking about. First of all, I argue that politics are important today, particularly in the modern era. We organize ourselves in political systems, and therefore it's important what kind of political system we have. I think the most effective, despite its problems, is some form of democracy, a form that represents the will of the people. But we need more than that. We also need limitations on the powers of government. Because unless we limit the powers of government, the problem is that governments can be very oppressive against the individual. I'm looking at my friend down here, my friends from Turkey. You all know what I mean by that. That governments can be very oppressive regarding the expression of religion, for example. And your country had to go through that in a time. I won't get more specific because I'll get myself in trouble if I do, but you know what I'm talking about. And that has happened in many other places as well. So we need various kinds of limitation. And thirdly, freedom is very important, because we have to have space in which to believe and in which to talk about our message. And I think that in many ways one could argue that Sufi Islam is a kind of freedom. It's a freedom to worship, to express your brotherhood and sisterhood with other people, and therefore very important. We live in a dangerous world. I can tell you. For those of you who have traveled, you know this. It is, and getting in some ways more dangerous. The major threat, I believe, that the world faces in terms of the lives of individuals is a contest between secularism and religion and tradition. Many people argue, and it's one of the less appealing of the Western exports, a kind of radical liberalism that is best expressed in the contemporary age by fascism and communism, that all tradition is bad. That is a problem. That all tradition is bad and needs to be replaced. And in governments that have been taken over, and by the way, all authoritarian ideologies try to take control of government, to control your life.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Try to control, and we have to resist that, especially in a place like South Asia. There's nowhere as diverse as this country. The diversity of South Asia is absolutely incredible. I once traveled with a friend of mine from the State Department. We were at the Delhi train station. People were passing. He said, you know, I think I've heard 5 or 6 languages in the short time I've been here. I said, if you stayed longer, you may hear 15 languages. The Indian Constitution has how many official languages? 22, 23 official languages. You have 2 national languages, one Hindi and one English, because South Indians don't want Hindi as the national language. It's an extraordinarily complicated place. But in order for all of this to live together, you are a universe in a country.
That's right.
For all of this to work together, you need freedom. Freedom is very important. Do not let your freedoms be sacrificed. There will be those who will say you'll live a better life if the government does this, if the government does that. Be cautious. There are important things governments can do, but do not sacrifice your freedom, because it's within the space of freedom that you can live out your life and you can talk about your religion, Sufi Islam. So I want to stop here, and my wish is that you all have a happy life. This organization has a bright future, and that we all are brothers and sisters to each other. Thank you.
MashaAllah, thank you very much, and Jazakallah khairan. Such a remarkable reflection on radical modernization. So that was by Dr. Walter Anderson. So thank you very much, and Jazakallah khairan. So now we